Welcome to this week's Pascal's China Lens. We're going to talk about the 4 things that I believe most Westerners get wrong when it's about China. And because we get that wrong, we translate most of the information and the content from China completely wrong as well. So I've described all this in my new book, Can We Trust China? It's available on Amazon, $2.99, so buy it now as an ebook. I mean, it's described all these 4 and many other misunderstandings about China in much more detail. But I'm going to get to it right now, just talking about these 4 things. If you want to know more, go and buy the book. But otherwise, just get an idea about it. I want to go through these 4 things. And the first thing is we look at China as an authoritarian regime in the West. It's a top-down regime. This is how we look at it. Xi Jinping and the party, the one party in China, the Communist Party, has all the power, and then 1.4 billion people just have to abide according. This is our view of China. What it means is that we do not believe in the West that the CCP or the CPC, the Chinese Communist Party or the Communist Party of China, actually is legitimate because they haven't been elected by the whole population. And because of that, we feel that actually this society is not something that we anywhere in the West, anywhere in the world, could accept as a legitimate policy or legitimate system. So why do I believe this is wrong? Well, if you ask the Chinese, they see actually the economic miracle of the past 30, 40 years, not despite Beijing and the CPC, but because of it. They feel that the CPC actually has contributed to the economic miracle and where China stands today. So how is it that we view that so different, that they see it as an enabler while we see it as actually something not legitimate? And so I think the answer is in 3 things. The first thing is that China is a meritocracy. A meritocracy which means that it's not just about the top that decides everything, but actually getting to the top, you actually need to do exams, you need to be doing things great for the country, doing things great for the people. And so you are getting judged, just like an exam, on every level to move up. And what that means is that actually this is a bottom-up society in a way, from a ruling point of view. Because any ruler, whether it's Xi Jinping or anyone below him, actually had to go through these ranks to get there. And they were judged at every little step. And so this justifies, from a Chinese point of view, that because they've done well in the previous steps, they're probably a good leader and a good ruler. And so where we see an illegitimacy, they actually believe that because it took time to get there, this meritocracy is more than legit. And this really creates a situation where the people in charge, in power, actually know how they got there and why they got there, and because of that, they respect that bottom-up society. And anyone in China can actually become a politician, become a leader, if you just go through the ranks. So it's actually a very, very broad meritocracy where everybody's included, bottom-up. Now, the second thing has to do with the misconception that we believe China is very centralized. Everything happens in Beijing, and Xi Jinping and the Communist Party and guanxi and all these people, they are deciding what is happening for the country. The reality is that the heavens are very high, or the sky is high, and Beijing is very far away, is an old saying which really means that although it's centralized in Beijing, a lot of money flows into Beijing because of taxes, is that China is one of the most decentralized countries in the world. Much more decentralized than most places on the planet. What it means is that the local governments have way more power than we actually believe. And this is why bureaucracy is so important in China, to make sure that the local governments can actually go in the same direction as the central governments. But there's a constant power play between local and central. And so China is very decentralized because you cannot rule a country the size of Europe, almost, a continent with 1.4 billion people, just by being centralized and telling everybody what to do. And this is a misconception. Now, the third thing, in my view, is very clear that China is a bottom-up society where the economy, the country, the wealth, the prosperity has been built from the bottom up. It's the people that worked really hard and really smart now. And these 1.4 billion people are actually the reason why the government can actually be authoritarian, because they wouldn't get their power if the power from the bottom up wouldn't actually be there. And so saying that China is an authoritarian regime is true in a way, because they decide a lot from the top, but it's only because the bottom is actually the engine giving them more energy to the top. And this is something very difficult to explain, but the reality is that whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's workers, whether it's people that want to go to school and get educated, I mean, there's so much energy bottom up that this benefits the CPC, the Communist Party of China. Now, the second thing is that we often say that China is very much a control state. It's suppressive, it's repressive, it's about censorship, about control, basically about letting people in or not in and deciding what is possible and not possible, and excluding many people and covering up things. I mean, this is a story we hear constantly. And we have a lot of examples of it. I mean, look at the lockdowns in Shanghai, very controlling. I mean, some of the things that happened with minorities in the past, and so on and so on. Journalists don't roam free in China. I mean, there is a lot of limitation. And so we see China as not free. And this is a second misunderstanding, I believe, because we have to look at China differently. But why do we believe China is not free, while the Chinese themselves are not so worried about not being free, and they don't seem to live in fear? So if you're living in an unfree country, why are you not living in fear, and why don't you fight for your freedom? I mean, this is the question that we should ask ourselves, and not whether China is free or not free. Why do the Chinese agree to it? And the answer is often, well, it's an authoritarian regime, so they have no choice. But that is the wrong answer, because I just explained it's a bottom-up society. The reality is very different. And there's again 3 reasons why the Chinese feel a lot more free than we think so. And the first reason has to do with history, has to do with culture. If you think about Confucianism, I mean, anything under the heaven, all the people, they need some rules and regulations and rituals and customs. And so this is something in the Chinese society that's very strong. So the Chinese are very used to this environment where there's certain limitations. And so they see these boundaries not as boundaries of not being able to do something, but more as boundaries to avoid chaos. And so this is part of the Chinese culture. I mean, it might sound easy to explain this like that and say, okay, but it's still a boundary, it's still a framework, and it is. But if everybody accepts the framework, just like we do in the West, we can't drive through a red light. I mean, China has other frameworks and other limitations, and this has a lot to do with keeping the order in the country. And the main worry of the Chinese government and the Chinese people in general is that chaos would actually stop the engine of growth and economy in China. And so these rules, they feel comfortable with it much more than we feel comfortable with it. So this is a mindset thing. But the second thing is even more important. And if we go and look back 30, 35 years ago, what we see is that most of the freedoms, the rights that we had in Western Europe, for example, or in America, that we thought as being normal and as granted, were actually not available or very, very limited in China. And so if you just look 200 years ago, I mean, China was actually controlled by the West very often. And so they had to liberate themselves. But if you just look at the last 30, 40 years, I mean, there's so many new freedoms that they gained that it's almost like every year China has gotten more freedoms. And so they feel liberated. Well, we believe China is not free. But every year they feel they have more freedom. Well, we believe China's never been free. And so this is a misunderstanding, because as long as they feel that most people get more freedom, actually China is on a path of liberation. And so because of that, they don't feel unfree. Now, the other thing has to do with the curiosity of Chinese. And having lived in China 20 years myself, I feel, I mean, this is a population, 1.4 billion people that are more curious and interested in the unknown than anywhere else in the world almost. And so that curiosity leads to freedom. It's a different way of thinking about freedom, but the fact that they want to learn from the West, they want to know more, they want to explore, they're basically looking for identities, all that, this is curiosity, and that is freedom on itself, because they know much more than we believe that they know. Actually, China is a lot more free than we think so, but we see it within our eyes and with our lens. Well, we should look at it how they actually are exploring that freedom of tomorrow. Now, the third misunderstanding, which is a big one as well, is that we see China as very rigid, very static. Basically, it's standstill and it's guarded and controlled, and so nothing really happens. And so we're probably going to go back to more control, which means China is going back to getting enclosed and going back in time, like the Mao era or the Cultural Revolution, on itself. And so this is the view that many have in the West. We look at China as not liberal. We see China basically being on itself and closed up. And so why do I believe that this is completely a wrong perception of looking at China? Well, if you ask the Chinese, for them they see their system as being the best for China's evolution on itself. But how can you see an unfree and authoritarian system as being a good system to evolve and actually have some progress in life? Well, there's three simple reasons again why we look at this in the wrong way. And the first one has to do with the fact that China over the past 30-40 years has been in constant change. The only constant is change. And that means China is way more dynamic, way more changing, and change every day is kind of the new normal that has been like that for 30 years. And so Chinese have been used to actually change things. So saying that China is static doesn't make any sense. Actually, if you look at it in the past, it's very clear that China changed more and reformed more as a country, as a system, than any country on the planet. Think about it, in the 80s, where Deng Xiaoping said, well, we're going to open up China. This was a communist country that was saying we're going to become more liberal in terms of economic dealings. This is a complete switch. And so they've done this many times. And so I think China has changed more than any country in the world. And because of that, it's very, very fast and very, very dynamic. And I think that is where, when we look at China as being rigid, we're completely wrong in that perspective. If you live in China, you see constant change constantly. So why do we think like that? Well, the main thing is that we're worried that China just wants to keep control, a power play from Beijing, and that the system is actually getting more and more rigid. But when you look inside the system, and I've explained that in my book in more detail, you see it as a very self-correcting system. Think about the anti-corruption campaigns in China right now. Xi Jinping really wants to tackle corruption and has been doing that for like 10 years now. And so if you look at that, it means making sure that within the system there's no problem, or the people that cause problem or are corrupt, that they're actually excluded from the system. And so why would you do that if everything is just about keeping more power for you and the people around you? So there is a self-correcting mechanism that we don't see in the West. And that has again to do with what I said before, that curiosity. Chinese want to learn, they want to know, they want to improve. And so they're constantly asking, even the population, they're asking companies, they're asking think tanks what the situation is. They're learning from the West, and they're taking what they think is useful for China, and they're adapting that mechanism and that engine constantly. And so where we see a Chinese engine that is broken, actually the Chinese see an engine that is constantly improving and perfectioning itself and getting more optimized. And so this is something we don't see often in the West. But this is really why China trusts that their system will always self-correct and improve, because they're learning through the process. And the third thing has everything to do, which I believe is the biggest misunderstanding of China. China is a cyclical environment. And what that means is that there's moments of lots of control. Think about the lockdowns. Think about things that really people have little freedom to progress. The tech crackdowns that we saw last year, for example. Well, these are moments in time. And what we forget is that there's also moments of letting go. And so there's moments of lots of control, where there's actually people understand, Chinese people understand, and Chinese businesses understand, and politicians understand, this is a moment we should be careful, cautious, and not create too much trouble. We should just go with the flow and with what Beijing is guiding us towards. But then at certain points there's new trends and new things happening, and then there's letting go of that control. And so the cyclical downturn means that the government is letting go of control for that new things that is happening. And because China is constantly changing, that is the moment of innovation, of creation, of change, and that is the moment where prosperity gets created. And so it's a cyclical trend, but on top of it, it's an evolutionary cyclical trend. Or like this, what that means is that with every control they learn, and when they let go, they actually know that now this is something they should have in their next control and next regulation happening to prosper, to have everybody have prosperity in the future. Now the fourth thing and last thing that I think most Westerners get wrong, and I've explained that in my previous video a little bit, is about the collective. We see China as one big group. I mean, they're all the same. They're very uniform, and there's one Chinese, the Chinese, and the Chinese Communist Party, and we talk about the Chinese companies, and it's as if they're all the same. And what that means is that we often see China as not being humane or people-centric because we believe they're only interested in that collective. They're only interested in the group, in the nation, in the culture, and they're not interested in the individuals themselves. And so this is a view that we have where we believe in the West that China doesn't care about individuals. And again, that's completely wrong. Because China's true power, and this is what I've learned and explained in my book, is really about the Chinese people, the individuals, as well as the culture. And so this is so strong that they actually believe that this is helping them into a more human-centric society. Common prosperity for everyone is what Xi Jinping says. And so why is it that we have this wrong view? Well, again, there's three reasons. The first one, which we always forget about China, or too often, is that China has a really rich culture. It has a culture of 2,500 years, a family relationship culture. And what that means is that Chinese trust each other within that culture. And because of that, it's very people-centric. This is about people. This is about people trusting people. And so this is built within the culture. And because of that, they actually feel that they are the ones that are justifying and making the government and the regime in Beijing legitimate, because they are the ones that actually provide the power to the central government. And so this is something where they feel people are very important, maybe even more important than we believe, because of that glue and because of being included in that collective. I explained that last week in my collective versus individual, where actually China is very people-centric. Now, I'm not going to go through that video again, so you can look at the video from last week. I'm going to put the link in here. And basically what it means is that we in the West are very individualistic within our network and very collectivistic within our system, while the Chinese are very collectivistic within their network. Think about the relationship, the guanxi as they call it, within the family relationship and culture. But when it's about the individual, they trust the system. The individuals trust the system to actually help them progress in life. And what that means is that the Chinese are actually very people-centric, or the system is very people-centric. Because the system, the government, the Communist Party, what they want to do is make sure that as many people as possible, as many individuals as possible, progress in life. And as long as they can do that and promise that and achieve that, they will get the support from the individuals. And so yes, this is a very bottom-up society giving legitimacy to the government because they feel their life has improved. And so China is a very people-centric government. It's a very people-centric culture. But it's people-centric from a collective within the relationship. It's people-centric from an individual within the system, as long as people progress in life. And that is why the focus is on common prosperity in the future. And the last thing, and maybe the most important of all, is really that Chinese have dreams. And so their dreams is really about a better future. And so they are hopeful people. Most of them are. And so that means that they really see an advancement in their lives. And so yes, Chinese really see that these dreams, these hope, is really the reason why actually they can progress in the future. And so this is very, very different from the way that we look at it. We look at a really rigid, a really authoritarian and unfree system, and Chinese look at it from a very, very different point of view. Actually, they look at it from a very diverse environment. And so if you could summarize this all, I mean, where we see an authoritarian regime, actually, it's almost a bottom-up society. Where we see a really unfree environment, they see a liberated environment. Where we see a very static and rigid environment, it's actually a cyclical environment that goes up and down, and sometimes you can do a lot and sometimes you can't. And basically, where we see a collective where everybody is the same, China themselves is very, very diverse. And so this diversity is also the result of the dreams of 1.4 billion people. And so if we change our view and look at China as a bottom-up, more liberated, cyclical environment that is extremely diverse, we understand the power of China. But this also justifies somehow for many Chinese that the system, the government and the party is actually legit, is really trying to have a system that is as open as possible, that is more and more free and cares about people. And so this is where we in the West don't believe any word of that, because for us it's an authoritarian control regime that is unfree and basically only thinks about the collective and not about the individuals. While the Chinese see the complete opposite. And so I believe if we understand these four things, then we in the West will definitely start looking at China with a different lens. It doesn't mean we will accept everything, because our culture, our past, our experience is very different, and our normal is also very different. But at least we can empathize and understand and believe that the systems in China could be different from ours, simply because they have a different lens and experience and ambitions to look at their own. And so I believe we need to look at these four things and try and get that not wrong, but get it right, and look at it from a Chinese lens to understand China. If we don't do that, it's going to be very difficult to understand China. If you want to get more detail about that, buy my book. There's a lot more explanation about all these things with many examples, and it's available on Amazon, as I said before. See you next week for another weeks of Pascal's China Lens.